It was a quiet afternoon when Mira entered the music academy, the air filled with soft piano notes echoing down the hall. She walked slowly, holding her old cleaning cart. Her steps light, her eyes calm. She had started working there just a week ago, and already everyone knew her as the kind woman who cleaned the classrooms, the one who always smiled and never spoke much. The students barely noticed her. They were busy practicing their scales and songs. Some played too fast, some missed notes. But they all tried hard to impress their teachers. Mira quietly moved between the rows of chairs, picking up papers, dusting the shelves, and wiping the piano surfaces with gentle hands. Her fingers lingered a little longer on the keys each time, as if her heart remembered something her mind tried to forget. Outside, the sky was cloudy, and soft sunlight streamed through the windows. Falling on the grand piano in the middle of the room, Mira paused there for a moment, watching a young girl play. The girl's fingers trembled, the notes uneven, but Mira smiled softly. The melody was the same piece she had once played years ago on a big stage. Under bright lights back when people clapped for her, she could almost hear it again, the applause, the feeling of her fingers gliding across ivory keys, the emotion that rose like waves in her chest. But she shook her head and whispered to herself, "Not now, Mira, not anymore," and continued cleaning. The teachers talked loudly near the door, arguing about which student should perform at the upcoming recital. They didn't notice how Mira's steps slowed whenever the piano played. She wasn't trying to listen, but music had a way of finding her. It wrapped around her heart like an old friend. One of the students, a tall boy with glasses, noticed how Mira paused near the piano and smirked. "You like music, ma'am?" he asked, half mocking. Mira nodded politely. "It's beautiful," she said. "You must all practice very hard." Her voice was calm. Humble and full of quiet respect, the boy laughed and said, "It's not as easy as it looks," then went back to his sheet music, not realizing she knew more about those keys than anyone in the room. Every day after her shift, when the hall was empty, Mira stayed for a few extra minutes. She would sit quietly in the last row, close her eyes, and listen to the silence of the piano. The world outside the windows turned dark, but inside, the faint glow of the moonlight touched the piano like silver. Sometimes she would lift the piano cover just a little, run her fingers across the smooth surface, and smile sadly. She had once lived for this and for music, for sound, for beauty, but life had other plans. There was a time when she was known on concert posters, her name written in shining letters, Mira Leighton, piano virtuoso. People admired her gift. They called her graceful, brilliant, unstoppable. But then came a night of rain, a road accident, and the sudden silence that changed everything. She never played again after that, not even once. She had lost more than just her career. She had lost her reason to sit at the piano. Every note reminded her of what was gone, so she left it all behind. The fame, the music, the applause, and began a new life far away. Now, years later, she was here, cleaning floors in a building full of pianos. It might have looked like a sad fate to some, but for Mira it was peace. She didn't want the stage anymore. She only wanted to be near the sound she once loved, even if she was just the one wiping dust from the keys. Sometimes the teachers would pass by her and say, "Be careful not to scratch the piano," and Mira would smile and nod. Her touch was so light that not even the softest note would complain. She treated every piano like an old friend, gentle and precious. On Fridays, the students gathered in the main hall for group practice. Mira always made sure the floors were spotless before they arrived. Then she'd quietly stand near the back, pretending to fix the curtains but secretly listening. The notes filled the room like sunlight, and for a moment she felt alive again. One evening, after everyone had left, a soft drizzle started outside. The air smelled like rain and nostalgia. Mira walked to the piano, slowly lifted the cover, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. Her heart began to race, her fingers trembled. She pressed one key, a single note. It echoed softly through the hall. Pure and clear, her eyes filled with tears. She laughed quietly. "Still the same sound," she whispered, and then quickly pulled her hand back as if she had touched something forbidden. She closed the cover, gathered her cleaning things, and walked out into the rain. No one knew that the quiet janitor who swept the floors of the academy had once played in grand theaters. No one knew that her heart still carried symphonies, hidden behind her shy smile. That night, as thunder rolled in the distance, Mira stood under a streetlight with her umbrella and listened to the rain's rhythm. Soft, steady, and full of music. She closed her eyes and let the sound fill her. The world saw her as an ordinary woman, but deep inside, she was still a pianist, one whose soul had never stopped playing. And though no one in the academy knew it yet, the day was coming when those silent hands would awaken again. And when they did, every heart in that music hall would hear the truth that humility can hide the greatest brilliance. The morning light poured into the music hall, painting long golden lines across the polished piano keys. Students were whispering and laughing as Mira walked in quietly, carrying her cleaning cloth and a small bucket of water. She smiled at them politely as she always did, her calm presence almost invisible among the sound of chatter and piano notes. She went to her corner and began wiping the tables, moving softly so as not to disturb anyone. But one small accident changed everything. As she leaned to pick up a fallen paper, her elbow brushed against the edge of the grand piano. A single note rang out. Bright, clear and perfectly tuned. The sound was beautiful, but it broke the room's rhythm. Every student turned their head at once. The air went still. Mr. Collins, the head teacher, looked up from his papers, his face tight with irritation. "Please be careful," he said sharply. "These instruments are not toys." Mira froze, her cheeks burning. "I'm very sorry, sir," she said softly. "It was a mistake." A few of the older students snickered. One of them, a confident boy named Eric, whispered to his friends, "Maybe she thought it was a drum." They laughed quietly, their voices sharp with mockery. Mira smiled awkwardly and went back to cleaning, trying to pretend she hadn't heard, but inside her heart ached. Not from the insult, but from the sound of that note, that single key, still echoing in her memory like a ghost from another life. Eric wasn't done, though. He turned toward her with a grin. "Hey, miss," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you like the piano so much, maybe you should play something for us." The class burst into laughter. Some covered their mouths. Others whispered things like, "She wouldn't even know which key is which." Mira looked down, clutching the cleaning cloth tighter. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "I don't play anymore." Mr. Collins sighed. "That's enough, Eric," he said. But the smile on his face showed he wasn't really angry. He turned to Mira, half amused. "You really shouldn't touch the instruments." "Dear." She nodded quickly. "Of course, sir," she whispered, and continued mopping the floor. Her movements were slower now, her thoughts far away. As the students went back to practice, the sound of piano music filled the hall again. But to Mira, every wrong note stung. Every beautiful chord whispered to her like a memory she tried to forget. When the lesson ended, the room emptied slowly. The students left. Laughing and chatting about lunch, Mr. Collins gathered his papers and walked out. Leaving Mira alone, she stood still for a moment, staring at the piano. The light from the window fell directly on it, like a spotlight waiting for a performer. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked closer. She placed her palm gently on the lid, feeling the smoothness of the wood. Her reflection stared back at her, tired eyes, gentle smile, years of silence behind them. "Why did I stop?" she whispered to herself. "Why did I let it go?" She remembered her old teacher's words. "Music never leaves you, Mira, even if you leave it." But before she could lift the cover, the sound of footsteps came from the hallway. She quickly stepped back, grabbed her bucket and pretended to clean. A few students peeked inside, giggling again. "There she is," one said, "the piano lady." Another whispered, "Maybe next time she'll give us a concert." They laughed and walked away. Mira smiled faintly, though her heart was heavy. "Children," she said softly to herself, "they don't mean harm." Later that day, during the next class, something unusual happened. A student named Lily, a quiet girl with shy hands, was struggling to play a piece by Chopin. The notes stumbled and fell apart halfway through. Mr. Collins frowned. No, Lily. This is all wrong," he said impatiently. "You have to feel the rhythm, not fight it." He demonstrated the passage. But even his version sounded forced, stiff. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, sir, I just can't," she whispered, and ran out of the room. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. The other students shifted in their seats, unsure what to do. Mr. Collins rubbed his forehead in frustration. "Honestly, it's just a simple etude," he muttered. "Anyone with proper sense of touch could play it." Then, his gaze fell on Mira, who was quietly wiping the blackboard near the door. "You there?" he said suddenly, his tone sharp but playful. "You seem to enjoy listening. Why don't you try playing it?" Mira looked up in shock. "Me?" she said softly, almost whispering. The students gasped. Eric grinned again. Yes. Let her try, he said. Maybe she'll surprise us. The whole room filled with laughter. Some students clapped mockingly. Go on, Miss Mira, one said. Show us what you got. Mr. Collins folded his arms. Amused, come on then, he said. If you can play even one line correctly. I'll be impressed, Mira hesitated, her heart pounding. She looked at the piano, the same one that had waited for her all these days. And then at the faces around her. Some mocking, some curious. She set down her cleaning cloth, wiped her hands slowly, and walked toward the piano. Every step felt like a step back in time. The students fell silent. When she reached the bench, she sat down gently. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Trembling slightly, the air in the room grew still. Even Mr. Collins leaned forward, curious. Mira closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, It's been a long time. Then she pressed the first key. A single note floated through the hall, pure, steady, and full of emotion. The laughter stopped, every head turned. The janitor was no longer just a janitor, and though no one knew it yet, that small moment, that simple act of touching the keys, was the spark that would change everything they thought they knew about her. And about music itself, the room was silent. The kind of silence that makes your heart beat louder than any sound. Mira sat on the piano bench, her hands trembling just above the keys. Everyone stared, half expecting her to laugh and walk away, but she didn't. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the sheet music in front of her. Mr. Collins leaned against the piano, his arms crossed. Go ahead then, he said with a smirk. Let's see if you can even find middle C. A few students snickered. One whispered, She's probably never touched a piano in her life. Another said, This will be good. But Mira didn't hear them anymore. Her world had gone quiet. It was just her, the piano, and the rhythm of her heartbeat. She lifted her fingers, her mind remembering something her body had almost forgotten. The weight of the keys, the space between notes, the way music felt when it came from the soul instead of the page. She pressed the first note. It was soft, almost too gentle to hear, but it rang pure and steady. The students' laughter faded. Mira's fingers moved to the next note and then the next. Slowly, a melody began to form, delicate, trembling, unsure, like a bird testing its wings after years in a cage. The room held its breath. Mr. Collins straightened. His smirk disappeared. The students leaned forward. Watching, Mira stopped for a second. Her hands froze in midair, her eyes glistened. She hadn't played in so long. She thought she'd forgotten how. But as she stared at the keys, memories came flooding back, in concert halls, applause, the glow of stage lights, her mother's proud smile from the front row, then the night of the accident, the rain, the sirens, the silence that followed. Her throat tightened, but instead of stepping away, she took another deep breath and began again. This time the notes flowed smoother, her hands moving like they remembered every emotion hidden in the music. She played not the student's version, but her own, full of feeling, every chord breathing life, sorrow and beauty. The melody rose, fierce and powerful, then fell into a whisper so tender it could break your heart. The sound filled every corner of the room, wrapping around everyone who listened. A few students exchanged wide-eyed looks. Eric's smirk faded. He stared in disbelief. Mr. Collins's hand, still resting on the piano, slowly lowered as if even he didn't want to disturb the magic unfolding. The janitor, the woman they had mocked, was playing Chopin as if she had written it herself. Mira's fingers danced, her movements fluid and graceful. She wasn't reading the notes. She didn't need to. The music was inside her, buried deep, waiting for this moment to breathe again. She lost herself in it. Every note carried a memory, every chord a piece of her story. She could see her old piano teacher's face, hear his voice, "Don't just play, Mira. Feel." And she did. Her heart poured through her hands. When the final note came, it lingered in the air like a sigh that didn't want to end. Mira sat still, her hands resting gently on the keys. The hall was silent. No one dared to speak or move. Even the air felt frozen. Then slowly she stood up. Her eyes were soft, her smile shy. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It's been many years since I last played." Mr. Collins blinked, speechless. He looked at the sheet music, then at Mira, then at the stunned students. "Many years?" He repeated, his voice shaking slightly. That was perfect," Eric stammered. Who are you?" Mira gave a small, humble laugh. No one special, she said. Just someone who used to love the piano a long time ago. The students still couldn't believe what they had seen. The same woman they teased every day for mopping floors had just played one of the hardest piano pieces in the world. Flawlessly, with emotion that made their hearts ache. Mr. Collins finally found his words. Used to? He asked, You don't play anymore? Mira shook her head gently. No, sir, I stopped. He frowned. Stopped? But why, with skill like that? She interrupted softly. Sometimes life plays a song you can't follow. Her eyes turned distant, her voice faint. When I lost my family, the music stopped inside me. A heavy silence fell again. No one knew what to say. Eric looked down, guilt rising in his chest. Lily, the shy student from earlier, wiped her eyes quietly. Mr. Collins exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't know, he murmured. Mira smiled. It's all right, she said. You weren't supposed to know I didn't come here to play. I came here to listen. The students exchanged glances. Something had shifted in the room. The laughter and arrogance had vanished, replaced by respect, and something deeper. Mr. Collins cleared his throat. Miss Mira, he said carefully, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you to, maybe, help the students sometimes. You clearly understand the music better than any of us. Mira shook her head at first. Oh no, I can't, I'm just a cleaner. But Lily stood up, her voice trembling. Please, ma'am, teach us. I want to play like that. I want to feel the music like you do. One by one, the others nodded, their pride forgotten. Mira's eyes softened. She looked at their young faces, so eager, so full of hope, and felt something warm bloom in her heart, something she hadn't felt in years. She nodded slowly. All right, she said, smiling, but only if you promise me one thing. Never play to show off. Play to speak, to tell your story. They all agreed quietly. The air felt lighter now, softer, filled with respect. As Mira walked out of the hall, the faint echo of her playing still lingered. The students didn't go back to practicing right away. They just sat there, letting the sound live in their minds. And from that day on, whenever Mira entered the music hall, no one saw a janitor anymore. They saw the woman who could make a piano weep, who had turned silence into beauty, and who had reminded them all what real music meant. The sound of her music still floated in the air long after Mira had left the room. It lingered in the corners, soft and haunting, like the echo of something too beautiful to fade. The students didn't speak for a while. Some just stared at the piano as if it were something sacred now. Mr. Collins leaned against the desk, his eyes distant, his mind replaying every note she had played. That night, Mira went home to her small apartment. The place was simple, a single window, a wooden table, and an old clock that ticked softly against the quiet walls. She made herself a cup of tea and sat near the window, watching the city lights flicker. Her hands still tingled as if the piano keys had left their memory behind. She smiled sadly, whispering, I shouldn't have played. But deep inside, she knew something had awakened, something she had buried long ago under layers of grief and silence. The next morning, when she arrived at the academy, the atmosphere was different. The students looked at her with wide eyes, whispering to one another. The same people who once laughed when she passed now greeted her with respect. Good morning, Miss Mira, Lily said shyly. Clutching her sheet music, Mira smiled, surprised. Good morning, dear, she replied. Even Mr. Collins greeted her differently. His usual pride softened. Miss Mira, he said, I wanted to thank you for what you did yesterday. The students have been inspired. I've never seen them so motivated, Mira laughed lightly. I'm happy they're practicing, she said. They have great potential. He nodded, then hesitated. Would you consider helping me teach the advanced group? Just once, maybe? They could learn so much from you. Mira froze, her eyes lowering to the floor. I don't teach anymore, she said quietly. It's not who I am now, but you are a teacher, he said softly. You just forgot it. Her heart trembled at his words, but she smiled gently and walked away, choosing to stay silent. That afternoon, while cleaning the rehearsal hall, she found a small group of students struggling with a difficult duet. Their fingers stumbled over the notes, frustration building with every mistake. Lily looked up and saw Mira near the door. Miss Mira, she called, can you help us, please? Mira hesitated, the mop still in her hand. I shouldn't interfere, she said. But Lily's eyes pleaded, just once, please. After a moment of silence, Mira sighed softly and walked toward the piano. She sat beside the nervous students, Let's see, she said kindly. You're both too focused on getting the notes right. But music isn't just notes and it's feeling. She guided their hands gently, showing how one melody should breathe while the other listens, her voice calm, her movements graceful. In just a few minutes, the broken, clumsy duet began to flow together like a river finding its rhythm. The students stared in awe. How did you do that? One asked. Mira smiled. I didn't do anything, she said. I just reminded you to listen to each other. Word spread quickly. The janitor, who once hid in the shadows, was now teaching music better than anyone at the academy. More students began seeking her out quietly, asking for help, for advice for a few minutes of her time. And Mira, though hesitant, never turned them away. Mr. Collins watched from afar, his heart torn between pride and guilt. He had mocked her once. Now he couldn't imagine the academy without her. Days turned into weeks, and Mira slowly became a quiet legend among the students. They called her the piano whisperer. Some said she could make even the old piano sing again. Others swore that when she played, time seemed to stop, but behind her soft smile, Mira still carried a quiet sorrow every time she touched the piano. She felt the ghosts of her past, her family, her lost concerts. The night her world had shattered one evening, after helping a student finish a piece, she stayed alone in the hall. The lights were dim, and the only sound was the hum of the night wind against the windows. She sat down at the piano, her reflection staring back from the glossy black surface. For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly, she began to play. The melody was soft and sad, not written on any sheet. It came from her heart. Every note was a memory, every pause a tear she never shed. The music filled the empty hall, rising and falling like the story of her life. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently on the glass. The rhythm matched her song, soft and steady. She closed her eyes, her fingers gliding effortlessly. The years melted away. She was young again, standing on a grand stage, her dress shimmering under the lights, her family smiling from the front row. But then came the crash of thunder, the blinding lights of an ambulance, the rain-soaked road, her trembling hands over the keys that she would never touch again. The notes faltered. Her hands froze, and she opened her eyes, breathing hard. Tears rolled down her cheeks. No, she whispered, not again. Just then, the door creaked open. It was Lily, standing with her umbrella dripping rainwater onto the floor. She had come back to return her notebook, but froze when she saw Mira. Miss Mira, Lily said softly. You're crying. Mira smiled weakly and wiped her tears. I'm fine, dear, she whispered, just... Remembering, Lily stepped closer. That song you played, it felt alive. Mira looked at her, her heart full and heavy. Music is alive, she said. It remembers everything you try to forget. That night, when she locked the piano and turned off the lights, something inside her had changed for the first time in years. She didn't just feel pain. She felt a spark of healing. The world was beginning to hear her again, not as a virtuoso on a grand stage, but as a woman who had found her soul again through the sound she once lost. And though she didn't know it yet, that night's song, the one she played for herself, would soon echo far beyond the walls of that academy, reminding everyone that true greatness doesn't shout, it whispers. The next morning, sunlight poured through the academy windows like liquid gold, warming the polished floor and glinting off the piano keys. The students were already whispering excitedly before classes began. Everyone was talking about Mira, the woman who played like a dream, the quiet janitor who had turned out to be a mystery. Some said she was once famous, others thought it was just a rumor. But one thing was certain. No one looked at her the same way anymore. When Mira walked in carrying her cleaning supplies, the chatter softened. Students greeted her politely now. Good morning, Miss Mira, they said. With smiles instead of laughter, she nodded kindly, her gentle eyes shining with a warmth that made even the shyest ones smile back. Mr. Collins was already in the hall arranging music sheets. He looked up and gave her a respectful nod. Morning, Miss Mira, he said. I hope you don't mind. But I told the director about you. Mira froze, her hand still on the mop handle. The director? She repeated softly. He smiled nervously. Yes. I told him about your performance, about what you've done for the students. He'd like to meet you. Mira's heart skipped a beat. Oh, I don't think that's necessary, she said quickly. I'm just helping a little. Mr. Collins shook his head. Helping? he said. You've inspired the whole academy. That's not just helping, Miss Mira. Before she could respond, the door opened, and a tall man in a gray suit entered. The director himself. His eyes were kind but sharp, the kind that saw more than they revealed. So, he said with a smile, you must be Mira, the mysterious pianist everyone is talking about. Mira blushed slightly. I'm not mysterious, sir, she said humbly. I just clean here, the director chuckled. That may be what your contract says, but from what I've heard, your hands tell a different story. The students giggled softly. Mira lowered her gaze, feeling shy. The director continued. I would very much like to hear you play again. Miss Mira, would you grant me that honor? Mira hesitated, the same fear rising in her chest. Fear of being seen again, fear of remembering. Sir, I'm not a performer anymore, she said gently. But the director wasn't one to give up. Music doesn't ask who you are. It only asks if you can feel it, he said kindly. And everyone here says you can. The room was silent. All eyes turned to her, waiting. Finally, Mira nodded. Only for a moment, she said softly. Only this once. The director stepped back. Giving her space, Mira sat down at the piano, her hands trembling slightly. The sun fell across the keys, turning them into lines of light and shadow. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first note was soft. Like a sigh after a long silence, the melody grew slowly, full of emotion, sorrow, peace, and hope. Each sound told a piece of her story, her loss, her return, her quiet love for music that never truly died. The students stood still. Even the director's eyes softened. There was something holy in the way she played. Not perfect, but pure. Every note carried feeling. Every pause was a heartbeat. When she finished, the silence that followed was heavy and beautiful. The director's voice broke it softly. You play like someone who has lived 1,000 lives, he said. I can see why the students admire you. Mira smiled faintly. I don't deserve that, she said. I only played what I felt. The director looked at her for a long moment, then asked, if you don't mind my asking, why did you stop playing? The room grew quiet again. Even the sound of the ticking clock seemed to slow down. Mira's smile faded. Because I lost the reason to play, she whispered. My husband and daughter, they were my audience, my home, my everything. When I lost them in the accident, the music stopped. A hush fell over the room. Lily pressed her hands to her mouth. Tears filling her eyes, Mr. Collins looked down. Ashamed of every harsh word he had ever spoken to her, Mira continued softly, her voice trembling. I tried to play again, but every note reminded me of them. It hurt too much, so I left the stage and disappeared. I thought if I stayed close to the piano, maybe I could still feel them somehow. For a long moment, no one spoke. The student's eyes glistened. The director nodded slowly. I see, he said. You play from pain, that's why it's so real. Mira smiled weakly. Pain teaches the heart how to listen, she said quietly. But love teaches it how to forgive. The director placed a hand over his heart. Miss Mira, he said, you don't just play music. You heal people with it? She looked at him surprised. Heal? Yes, he said. These young students, they chase perfection. But you've reminded them that music is about feeling, not showing off. Lily stepped forward. She taught me that, she said softly. Miss Mira told me to play to speak, not to impress since then. I've been able to play without fear. The director smiled at Mira. You belong here not as a cleaner but as a mentor, please. Consider teaching, Mira shook her head quickly. No, sir, I couldn't. I'm not ready for that. Then just think about it, he said kindly. The offer stands. He left the room, leaving behind a silence that felt warm instead of heavy. The students surrounded Mira, some thanking her, others simply smiling. Eric, the boy who once mocked her, walked up quietly. I'm sorry, he said. For before, Mira touched his shoulder gently. It's all right, she said. You learned something today. That's what matters. As she walked home that evening, the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The breeze carried faint echoes of piano notes from the academy windows. Mira closed her eyes and smiled. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. The world had seen her pain, but it had also seen her strength. She realized that the music inside her had never died. It had only been waiting for her to forgive herself enough to let it breathe again. That night, as she sat by the window with her tea, the city lights twinkling below, she whispered to herself, maybe it's time to play, Not for them, not for the world, but for me. And somewhere in the distance, a piano note echoed, soft, tender, and full of hope, as if the universe itself was answering her heart. Days began to pass with a quiet magic in the academy. Ever since that unforgettable day, the air itself seemed different. The students no longer rushed through their lessons. They played softer, listened deeper, and for the first time, music filled the hall with soul instead of noise. At the heart of that change was Mira, still in her simple uniform, still carrying her mop and cloth, but now, every eye turned to her with quiet respect. She never asked for attention, yet wherever she went she left warmth behind. When students argued over rhythm or timing, she would pause in her cleaning and gently say, "Music doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be honest," and somehow, those words always worked better than any teacher's lecture. Mr. Collins noticed the transformation too. The same class that used to frustrate him now played with feeling. And though his pride wouldn't let him admit it aloud, he knew why. Mira's presence had awakened something in everyone. Even in him. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the tall windows, Lily approached Mira holding a piece of paper. "Miss Mira," she said, "I wrote something for you." Mira smiled warmly. "For me?" she asked, taking the paper gently. It was a short poem written in shaky handwriting. "You clean the dust from the floor, but also from our hearts you play no song for fame, yet your silence sings louder than all." Mira's eyes softened. She folded the paper carefully and pressed it to her heart. "Thank you, Lily," she whispered. "This means more than you know." But deep inside, she felt a small ache. A reminder that she could inspire others, yet still hadn't found the courage to truly face her own past. She had played again, yes, but only within the safe walls of the academy, not under the weight of real eyes, real memories. That evening, as the academy prepared for its annual spring concert, the director called a meeting. "We'll hold it at the town theater," he announced. "It will be our biggest event in years, and I want it to mean something special." He looked toward Mira, his eyes glimmering with an idea. "Miss Mira, would you consider performing one piece, perhaps a duet with one of our students?" The room went still. Every student turned to her, hope shining in their faces. Mira shook her head immediately. "No, sir, please, I can't. I'm not ready for that," she said softly. "But you are," Mr. Collins said from behind her, surprising everyone. "You're the reason this academy is alive again. The stage deserves to hear you." Lily clasped her hands together. "Please, Miss Mira, do it. Play for all of us." The voices around her rose, kind, encouraging, loving, and yet Mira's heart tightened. She saw flashes of her old concerts, the blinding lights, the grand audience, her family smiling proudly from the front row. Then the memory shifted, twisted, the sound of sirens and rain replacing the applause. Her breath hitched. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I can't." She left the room quickly, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The others stood in silence, understanding the weight of what she carried. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by her small window staring at the stars. Her fingers kept tracing invisible piano keys on the table. She whispered into the darkness, "Why does music keep finding me when I keep trying to hide from it?" A soft breeze brushed her face through the open window, carrying with it faint echoes, laughter from the street below, the hum of life moving on. She closed her eyes and thought of her daughter's laughter, her husband's gentle voice. "You were born to play. Mira," he used to say, "even when it hurts, music will heal you." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She pressed her palm against her chest and whispered, "Maybe it's time." The next morning, she arrived at the academy early before anyone else. The hall was silent, dust floating in the shafts of sunlight. She walked to the piano and slowly lifted the lid. Her reflection looked back, older, gentler, stronger. She sat down, her fingers trembling. "One last time," she whispered. Then she began to play. The notes started soft, uncertain, but soon grew into a river of emotion. Her hands moved freely, as if guided by the ghosts of every song she had ever loved. The sound filled the empty hall. Pain, hope, forgiveness, all woven together. She didn't notice when the door opened. Mr. Collins stood there quietly, watching her behind him. The director and a few students gathered silently, not wanting to interrupt when she finished, her head lowered, tears glimmering on her cheeks. Mr. Collins stepped forward slowly. "That," he said softly, "is why you must play at the concert." Mira turned, Startled to see them all, the students were crying. Even the director's eyes were wet. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "That music, it belongs to my past, not my present." The director smiled gently. "No, Miss Mira, it belongs to your heart, and your heart is still here." For a long time, she said nothing. Her gaze fell on Lily, who was looking at her with such pure hope it almost hurt. Finally, she sighed, a small smile curving her lips. "All right," she whispered, "I'll play." "But only if Lily plays with me," Lily gasped. "Me?" "Yes, you," Mira said warmly. "You have the heart for it. And that's all music ever needs." The hall erupted in joy. Mr. Collins clapped his hands together. "It's settled then," he said. Mira and Lily, the highlight of our concert, that night. As Mira walked home, the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. She felt something she hadn't felt in years, excitement, fear, and peace all mixed together. She smiled to herself and whispered, "Maybe it's time the world hears my heart again, far away." The Academy's piano stood waiting, silent but alive, knowing that soon, the woman who once made it sing would return, not as the prodigy she once was, but as the woman who had rediscovered her soul through the courage to begin again. The day of the concert arrived with the kind of golden morning that feels like the world is holding its breath. The town theater shimmered under soft sunlight, its old red curtain swaying gently in the breeze. Outside, people gathered in excited clusters, parents, students, teachers, and strangers, all buzzing about the mysterious woman who would perform tonight. Inside the Academy's dressing room, Mira sat quietly beside the mirror. Her reflection stared back, calm on the surface. Trembling beneath, she wore a simple navy blue dress. Elegant yet modest, her hair, usually tied back while cleaning, now flowed softly over her shoulders. She looked less like a janitor and more like the woman she once was, the pianist who could make a room weep with a single note. Lily stood beside her, clutching her sheet music nervously. "Miss Mira," she whispered, "my hands are shaking." Mira smiled gently, taking the girl's hands into her own. "That's not fear, dear," she said softly. "That's your heart reminding you that what you're about to do matters." Lily nodded, blinking back tears. "I don't want to disappoint you." Mira squeezed her hands. "You could never disappoint me," she said. "Just play with feeling, not perfection. Music doesn't live in the fingers, it lives in the soul." Outside, the murmur of the audience grew louder. Mr. Collins peeked into the room. "5 minutes," he said, his voice a mix of nerves and pride. "They're all waiting." Mira took a deep breath and stood up. Her heart pounded. She hadn't faced an audience in years, and the thought of so many eyes watching her again made her chest tighten. But when she looked at Lily's innocent face, something in her softened. "All right," she said. "Let's make them feel something tonight." The stage lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Mira and our young pianist." "Lily?" Applause rippled through the crowd as they stepped onto the stage. Mira walked slowly, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. Lily followed close behind, her small hands gripping her music. When Mira sat at the piano, a wave of memories crashed over her. The heat of the lights, the faint smell of polished wood, the hush of anticipation. Her eyes stung, but she blinked the tears away. She glanced at Lily, who nodded, ready. The theater fell silent. Mira lifted her hands above the keys. The spotlight glowed warm on her face. Then the first note was born, soft, trembling, pure. It was a piece Mira had composed herself, a blend of sorrow and rebirth. The melody began slow, each note falling like raindrops, gentle and fragile. Then Lily joined in, her playing light and innocent, weaving hope into the sadness. Together, their sounds intertwined, old and young, pain and promise, teacher and student. The audience leaned forward, caught in the spell. The music told a story without words, of a woman who once lost everything, and a child who reminded her how to feel again. Mira's heart opened with every chord. Each key carried the echo of her past, her husband's laughter, her daughter's tiny hands pressing random notes beside hers, the thunderstorm that took them away, and the long years of silence that followed. But now, those memories didn't crush her. They danced with her, wrapped in the light of forgiveness. Her eyes glistened, but her fingers never faltered. She was no longer hiding from the music. She was speaking through it. Her grief turned into grace, her pain into power. As the piece reached its peak, Lily's melody soared, bright and hopeful. Mira's notes answered, deep and emotional. Their harmony rose like a conversation between two souls, one teaching the other that it's okay to hurt, and it's okay to heal. By the time the final note came, the entire hall was silent. The sound lingered in the air, delicate and eternal. Then slowly the audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the theater. People cheered, some cried, and even Mr. Collins, standing backstage, wiped his eyes discreetly. Lily turned to Mira, her face shining with tears. "We did it," she whispered. Mira smiled, her voice barely above a breath. The morning after the concert felt different, softer, brighter, as if even the sunlight had learned a new melody overnight. The Academy Hall was still quiet when Mira walked in, the echoes of applause from the night before still lingering faintly in her memory. Her steps were calm, unhurried. Every creak of the wooden floor sounded like a heartbeat, reminding her that life, just like music, keeps playing on even after silence. She wore her old uniform again, simple, clean, familiar, but now when students saw her, they didn't see a janitor. They saw something greater. They saw Miss Mira, the woman whose music had touched their hearts and changed the way they looked at their own. Lily was already waiting near the piano, her face glowing with excitement. "Good morning, Miss Mira," she called cheerfully. "Everyone's talking about you. Even the newspaper wrote about last night's concert." Mira smiled softly, shaking her head. "Newspapers fade, dear," she said. "But what we felt last night will stay with us." Lily nodded eagerly. "It was like magic," she said. "When you played, I felt everything. Happiness, sadness, even love." Mira's eyes softened. "That's because you were listening with your heart," she said. "That's what music truly is, Mom, a language of the soul." Just then, Mr. Collins entered, carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. His usual formal tone was gone, replaced by warmth. "For you," he said, handing her the flowers. "From all of us. You gave us more than music last night. You gave us hope." Mira hesitated, then accepted them gently. "Thank you," she said, "but truly, I didn't do anything grand. I just played what I had kept inside for too long." He smiled. "Sometimes that's the grandest thing anyone can do." The director joined them soon after, clapping his hands once. There she is, the heart of our academy," he said proudly. "I can't walk 5 steps in town without someone asking about you. Miss Mira, you've become a legend overnight." Mira laughed softly. "A legend who still scrubs floors," she teased. The director chuckled. "Not for long," he said. "I've spoken with the board. We'd like to offer you a permanent position as our resident piano mentor." The words hung in the air like a high note. Warm and shimmering, Mira blinked. "Mentor?" she repeated slowly. "But I'm not a teacher by training." "You're more than a teacher," he said gently. "You have what most trained instructors don't: heart, empathy, and truth. Our students need that more than anything." Lily clapped her hands excitedly. "Please say yes, Miss Mira," she said. "We all want you to stay." Mira looked at their hopeful faces, the students, the teachers, the place that had unknowingly healed her, and she felt her throat tighten. "All right," she whispered finally. "I'll stay." Cheers erupted in the hall. Students hugged one another. Lily threw her arms around Mira. "You'll never know how much this means to us," she said. Mira smiled, holding the little girl close. "Oh, I think I do," she whispered. From that day forward, Mira became the soul of the academy. She didn't teach with strict rules or heavy lectures. Instead, she taught through stories, feelings, and connection. Her classes were never silent. Laughter mixed with piano notes, mistakes turned into lessons, and every wrong chord became a step toward something beautiful. When a student played too fast, she'd gently say, "Slow down. The heart doesn't rush." When another cried after missing a note, she'd smile. "Don't worry. Even silence has music if you listen closely." Her words spread through the town like little seeds of wisdom. Parents began enrolling their children not for fame or trophies, but because they wanted them to learn from her. Months passed, and Mira's life found a rhythm again. Quiet mornings with coffee and music, afternoons filled with laughter and teaching, and peaceful evenings spent walking home under the streetlights, humming softly to herself. Sometimes, when she was alone in the hall, she would sit at the piano and play her old melodies, but now they sounded different. The pain had softened, replaced by warmth. The ghosts of her past no longer haunted her. They listened beside her, proud one evening, As the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Mira gathered the students for a small recital. Not for the public, but just for them. She stood before them and said, "You've all learned so much, but remember, music isn't about applause or awards, it's about understanding yourself. It's about being brave enough to feel." Then she gestured to Lily. "Why don't you begin?" Lily sat down and began to play the piece they had performed together at the concert. Her hands were steady, her heart full. The students listened in silence, mesmerized. When the final note faded, Mira clapped softly, pride shining in her eyes. "That," she said gently, "is what it means to speak without words." Later, when everyone had gone home, Mira stayed behind. Sitting by the piano as moonlight spilled through the window, she traced her fingers across the keys and whispered, "Thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to life itself, for giving her a second chance to love what she had lost." She began to play one last song, a soft lullaby, simple and tender. It wasn't written anywhere, it was just her heart speaking. Each note floated through the empty hall, carrying memories of all that she had endured. Loss, pain, rediscovery, and peace. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, and it almost sounded like applause when the final note faded. Mira closed the piano lid slowly and smiled. "The music never left," she whispered. "It just waited until I was ready to listen again." And from that night on, the Academy became known not just as a place of music, but as a place of healing. Every student who entered its doors carried a piece of Mira's story, a reminder that humility can hide greatness, and that even the quietest soul can play the loudest truth. As the stars shone over the sleeping town, the piano in the hall stood silent but alive, its keys still warm from her touch, waiting patiently for morning, when the humble woman with the gentle smile would return, not to clean but to teach, to guide, and to remind the world that sometimes the most beautiful songs are born from silence,